Okay, we're ready.
God, am I on time?
Good evening, and welcome to the City of Glendale Civil Service meeting of February 24th, 2010. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Here.
Commissioner Manukian?
Here.
Commissioner Gantis?
Here.
Chair Coleman.
Here. Next item, please.
Minutes. Action, consideration of the minutes of the meeting of February 10th, 2010.
Move for approval without reading.
Second.
Before we do that, I think there's one quick correction that needs to be made. I think the minutes show that I'm actually absent, that I was actually here, and that was brought to my attention. Great secretary here. So if you can make that change, that I was actually present here.
It says you're
It's
present.
been done.
I was physically here. How's that?
It says you were
Let
present.
me just. I know it was changed. I think after the it was posted.
Item 1 in the roll call.
Okay.
The name.
Oh, it's off the roll call. It's not on the roll call.
But it has been corrected. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes?
Chair Coleman.
Yes. Next item.
Oral communications.
Okay, I have cards, but they're on specific items. Next item.
Item 4, eligible lists established.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, these are the eligible lists that have been established by our staff since our prior Civil Service Commission meeting. As you can see, we have 3 lists that have been established. 4 lists that have been established. 3 are promotional, 1 is open. The total number of applications received is listed along with the total number who made the eligibility list. If you have any questions on this report, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Chairman?
Yes.
The firefighter recruit promo list, they are promoted from where?
This is Commissioner Gantis, this is an internal promotional recruitment is open only to the fire cadet individuals.
And so that's an offshoot of our, I asked that for a reason. I was pretty sure that was the answer because that's the cadet program that we've been going through. So these people are now being recruited to come in as firefighter recruits.
That is correct. A
It's
portion.
on a promotional, so they don't even have to go outside. So if they join the cadet program, it gives them a better chance of becoming a firefighter then. Isn't that right?
It certainly does. There's a lot to go through in order to qualify to be a firefighter, but number of hours worked and things like that. But this is the process for that. So
That's all I have.
Okay. Anything else on that item? Next item.
Item 5, job bulletin for city auditor.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is the job bulletin for the position of City Auditor. 2 weeks ago at our meeting, the item before you was the class specification for this position. And I have to apologize. At that time, we should have also brought you the bulletin for this because we didn't realize it till after the meeting that we are dealing with an executive recruitment. And under our rules, all executive bulletins do need to come before the Commission for approval. So that was overlooked at our last meeting. So we are having it here for you now. This bulletin is fully consistent with the specification which you approved 2 weeks ago, and as stated earlier at our prior meeting, it's the city's request to conduct a promotional recruitment for this position, open it actually next Monday. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them on this.
Any questions?
Right.
Yes.
As you know, Mr. Doyle, and I was quite adamant about this being an open rather than a promotional. Have we been able to ascertain how many of our employees would qualify, not necessarily apply, but would qualify under these requirements?
Commissioner Gantis, at the previous meeting, Mr. McFall attempted to answer that question by estimation, and I think he had indicated about 5 or 6. I'm not sure there would be that many, given the minimum requirements and the certifications and licensing and all that. My guess would be more in the neighborhood of 3 to 4. But of the individuals I know of, both within the internal auditor's office as well as the finance department, again, we strongly believe there is a sufficient pool of candidates internally to provide us with a very good city auditor following this process. So.
Anything else? Okay. I do have one card on this item. Dave Cole.
Good evening, Commission members. My name is Dave Cole. I'm the Vice President of the GMA. And the GMA wants to let you all know that we're in full support of a promotional recruitment for the auditor position. In fact, promotional recruitments are something we're very passionate about. Over the past several months, we've been working with Matt, quite a bit, Mr. Doyle, to discuss the fact that we need to do more with our current employees to prepare them to move into higher positions. The GMA and HR have been working diligently on several programs to work with our internal staffing in an effort to offer higher educational opportunities, which would in turn lead to better educated employees with a better chance of promoting. Going to an open recruitment when a position opens up creates a couple of negatives in our opinion. First, it makes our employees feel that they're not worthy of the job that they're applying for. And secondly, they normally have to train the person that comes in that isn't familiar with our organization. Secondly, an open recruitment takes much longer to go through, and it's much more costly. And in these times, we're trying to save ourselves as much as we can. While we know that some would say this is just another example of one group trying to support another group of employees, we feel that the city's got a tremendous amount of talent. And they're very motivated, and they do a great job. And while we realize there are times we need to go with open recruitment due to a lack of talented individuals, we feel that open recruitments happen more than they should in the city, and we're working really hard to prepare our in-house talent for these promotions. And the GMA and its members would really appreciate your guys' support and trying to make as many promotional applications as we can, because we do have great talent, and we're supportive of this one. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Just a quick comment on that. I think I think that people should be promoted within the city, as long as the process is a civil service process, where they actually compete for the same role, same job, and that job and that qualification is not carved for one person to be promoted to that particular slot. So I am 100%, I have been for the past 8 years on promotional recruitments. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a good, and that's the reason people go to supervisory academy and do a whole bunch of other things. That's the whole point. We had a librarian when we went outside, and we looked for a librarian outside, and we spent a whole lot of money in trying to find a librarian from outside, and I always said, wait a minute, let's first see if we have somebody inside. So I'm in favor of it, as long as we don't carve specific requirements that would basically carve just the job for a particular individual. As long as we don't do that and we open that for promotional to a number of people, 3, 4, 6, and they all have the same chance of competing for that same job, I think that's actually a great idea.
Okay. Yes.
Well, as I indicated last time, I was very adamant about it and asked that it be made open. I have listened to, I didn't get your name, David.
Dave Cole.
Mr. David Cole. And given this a considerable amount of thought, I am tried to be supportive of promotional. One question I would have before that, it would seem to me that since we did go to that supervisory academy graduation, is that a requirement for them to be the city? I mean, it would be to me, really significant that they've done that supervisory academy. Have the people that you're aware of all been to that supervisory academy?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gantis, the people I'm thinking of have been through that supervisory academy. We have not made graduation from the academy part of any of the job requirements as of yet. It's something we might be looking at in the future, but and I agree with you, it is a very valuable
Extremely
program.
valuable.
But the people I am thinking of, I believe they have 3 or 4 of them gone through that.
Much as I don't often change my mind, I have changed my mind. I will be supporting the fact that this is a promotional.
Move to approve.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian? Yes. Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Chair Coleman.
Yes. Next item.
Item 6, Civil Service Rule Amendments.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, pleased to present to you the first set of, say, wholesale amendments to our civil service rules over the past 5 years. It's been the last time since we've done this.
Seems like yesterday.
Commission did give staff direction to consider amendments to the rules, and in general it's a good idea to look at our rules and procedures and update them as the times change. What we have, previous iteration of rule amendments occurred in 2005. At that time, there were a couple of rules that were, in fact, adopted by this commission, but failed to get full approval by the City Council. And we've been asked to bring those items back. In addition to that, staff has done a pretty thorough job looking at the rules and coming up with a number of different changes that we're recommending. Along the way, other commissioners have brought things to our attention as a staff that need to be looked at as well. So we're at the point where we'd like to present what I would call a first go-through of the amendments. We're not asking for any kind of a vote tonight, but just some general direction on which of these rules to proceed with and which don't have the consensus to proceed. These rules, we've spent some time with our employee associations. They've seen copies of them. I think they're all represented here tonight, and they may have some comments on them. Anything that is proposed that would constitute a significant change in the working conditions would be subject to meet and confer with our employee associations, which we would then participate in that. As of tonight, though, again, we'd like to provide a brief overview of some of the amendments. We have proposed, I believe there are 28 of them, going from the start of the rules to the very end, and they go across each of the chapters and sections, and I'd like to more or less get the Commission's input on these rules as we proceed. So, Chair.
Yes.
My recommendation would be just to go and basically through them one by one and just say, is number 1, anyone have any questions on this? Anyone comment? No. Number 2, number 3, just go through them, not to go through, read each one and discuss each one, because if, the first 6, if no one has any issues on them, let's just move on. Just say number 1, any question, number 2, number 3, and then when we get to one that somebody has some comments, then we can just stop there. So we're not reading all of it into the record. Do we need to read all of them into the record, Mr. Scott?
No, sir. The agenda states what you've already read into the record.
Okay.
It's fine.
If that's okay. This will speed up the process.
If I can just chime in, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Abkarian, then I assume that the representatives of the various unions and associations have certain particular items. Maybe they can pop up if we've gone beyond, so that we make sure we hear them. But so keep with us as we're going down, and then we'll hopefully see a hand, whatever.
I like that idea.
Sure.
All right. I do have one card on this item. Chris Stavros.
Good evening, Chris Stavros, President, Glendale Firefighters Association. On the lines of your last 2 agenda items, we think you have a lot of good people working in the city. Scott Howard, Matt Doyle, people in the city manager's office, and we really think that you ought to look at what they're recommending on some of these changes and vote accordingly. Specifically, items 8, 11, and 18, we think that those are areas where if the personnel director or somebody in the city's manager's office isn't doing their job, then certainly that's a place for maybe you guys to step in, but we don't think that's the case now.
You repeat those?
Yeah, 8, 11, and 18.
The ones that I recommended. All three that I recommended. Thanks.
8?
Hey, that's all right. That's what we're here for, right? And I'm happy to talk about them specifically if you get to that point and you want to talk about them.
So you're here on just those three?
For the most part, yeah.
8, 11, and 18.
18.
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would invite you, Captain, whatever, Stavros, and Larry Ballesteros, the section number 27, which talks about changing the voting on the disciplinary appeals. I would hope that you both would. I hope you've reviewed that and have some feedback, because I think that's a rather significant one. And then I assume hopefully that's that. But if not, if you chime in, because those are certainly ones obviously that affect you and also the GCAEA also.
Okay. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. With all due respect to my fellow commissioners, with the abundance of work that's been put into this, I would like an overview from Matt Doyle, a brief overview of specifically amendments that the staff has recommended. The commissioners are familiar with the ones that they've recommended, and to give our viewing public and the individuals in the audience some idea of what we're dealing with here.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, because a lot of the changes that are being suggested by the staff aren't just little minor clerical changes. Some of them have real substance to them.
Okay. Chair Coleman, I'd be happy to do so. And again, I will go through these.
And if any of the commissioners have questions, since this is going to be a relatively brief presentation, I'd like you to hold off on questions you might have, and then ask Matt or Mr. Howard those questions. Okay? Does that work?
Works for me.
Okay. Art?
I'm not sure whether that's the most efficient way to handle it, but I'm willing to see how it works. I think the suggestion that Mr. Abkarian made would probably be more efficient, since all of us have read the changes, and I'm sure each of us have marked up which ones we want to specifically ask Mr. Doyle or Mr. Howard about. I think it would be more expeditious to do it that way than to have him go through 28 items.
Well, I don't think.
Let me put it to the commission this way. Do my fellow commissioners want to vote on these tonight?
That's not my understanding. I thought we're just we're going to see as far as individual items, but I didn't think we were voting.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there are some of these that are rather perfunctory that could be voted on. The challenge, and Mr. Howard pointed it out to me because I asked that question, is that if we do them piecemeal, either we do them all or we don't do them all. Because if we do them piecemeal, then we still have to go to the city council, and we don't want to send them to the city council.
Then we're not going to vote on them tonight.
Okay. That was Mr. Howard, by the way. I want to make sure he gets credit
Go ahead,
where
Matt.
credit is due.
Okay, I'll do my best to proceed in an expeditious manner. The amendment number 1 deals with adding the phrase, there's a section of the rules which talks about the equal employment opportunity categories, and we added the phrase "or any other protected category under the law" to that paragraph, which describes that. And just in the case of if state or federal government creates any additional protected categories, that it would be covered until the next time that we amend these rules. So that's rather what I would call a cleanup item. Unless I have questions, I'll just move on to the second one.
In addition, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, we're changing the phrase handicap status to disability to bring it more into the 21st century.
Okay. Why should we be in the 21st century?
Okay. The second amendment, this is in the section having to do with the definitions. We wanted to provide a definition of the term appointing authority. And that also goes along with amendment number 3. We use the term appointing authority and approving authority in many documents, many references within the work that we do. And we often get asked, what is the appointing authority, what is the approving authority? And it's just to clarify that the appointing authority is generally mean the department head, and the approving authority is the city manager. And that where that comes up in most cases is in our final notice of disciplinary actions, where we do have a line for both entities to sign. Item number 4 talks about in our the composition of our class specification that we add the FLSA designation. FLSA stands for the Fair Labor Standards Act, and we want to make clear whether or not the classification involved is either exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act or a non-exempt position. And probably maybe a year or so ago, we started including that in our specifications as well as our job bulletins, just to make it very clear what that designation means and what it implies for any individual either in that position or applying for that position. So. Number 5 deals with adding the statement with or without reasonable accommodation to the section that addresses rehabilitation and medical transfers. This is the appropriate nomenclature that is used in discussing both the ADA and Fair Employment and Housing, our obligation to accommodate, and it's just I think updated language that would best meet with what the current law is with regard to disability accommodations. Item number 6 is also in Rule 3, Section 4, removing the requirement that the Commission notification and approval on rehab and medical transfers come to the Commission. I think you'll recall, and it's been about a year ago, it was the March 25th, 2009 Civil Service Commission. We had a long discussion on the rehabilitation and medical transfer process. Under the law, the city does have an obligation under both the Americans with Disabilities Act as well as the State Fair Employment and Housing Act to engage in a process where we have to explore accommodations for employees who have either work restrictions or are disabled. Prior to this, I think it made sense for these types of decisions to come before the Commission, because in many cases when we're trying to accommodate an employee, a lot of times that accommodation is to transfer them into a position for which they're able to perform and within their work restrictions. And again, it made sense to come before the Commission. The law really requires that this decision be made in an expeditious manner by staff. And really, I think when we were discussing this before the Commission a year ago, a lot of you didn't think it made much sense to even bring it here, since it is our obligation. And we really shouldn't be putting you in the position of having to approve or deny an accommodation that's already been agreed upon. So that's the change that is being recommended there, and that's a somewhat significant change, I think, because it addresses the authority of the Commission. Moving on to item number 7. This is also in the section Rule 3, which talks about the qualification of candidates for the position. What it does is add the statement, fail to be among the most highly qualified candidates for consideration as a possible ground for disqualifying someone from an exam process. And what this really does is it solidifies our current practice when we're screening applications for examinations. In many cases, we will get a voluminous number of applications for a position, and we'll look at a candidate's applications, and we may determine that there's a set of candidates that meet the minimum requirements, and there might be a set of candidates who not only meet the minimum requirements but exceed them and might be in what we would term the more highly qualified candidates. When you're dealing with candidate pools numbering in the hundreds, very often we have to go to those who best meet the minimum qualifications, or as we put it here, the most highly qualified, and employ a screening on that type of a basis. And what we want to do is make that part of the rules to just again confirm what we've been doing for many, many years in screening out those who may qualify but perhaps aren't among the most highly qualified. What it does is it makes our job a lot more manageable, and it gives us justification for when someone does say, "Hey, I qualify. I should be allowed to come in and interview," or whatever the case may be. And this would just enable us the ability to further screen for the most highly qualified.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, did you say we could ask questions as they come to items that we're concerned about, or did you want us to wait till he's finished with a full presentation?
Go ahead, Commissioner Devine. Ask a question.
On that item, from what I understand on your explanation, that is staff would then determine those who are among the most highly qualified. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in my brief understanding of it, it appears that the staff
As a statement, failed to be among the most highly qualified candidates for consideration, and I just put very ambiguous. I think the language needs to be really tightened up.
Absolutely, I agree.
And
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I think we're losing sight of what happens here. There are sometimes we have positions where undertakes to do culls down to 4 or 5. I think they could have maybe 100 or 150 or 200. And if we
Don't give them that power. You're going to have difficulties in testing. You're just going to add burdens that are going to, as we're cutting staff down because of the budgeting, we're going to create a situation where they're just going to be unmanageable. Obviously, if you're concerned about the number of people, I suppose we could put a past person's ability to go through these and making a decision? This qualifies, this doesn't qualify. That's the process that I have a problem with. It's not, I understand the need for it. I think it might be better to have some kind of safeguard, at least have two different people review it and make that decision. I don't know what the right answer is, or else I completely understand the need to do it. It's just how they go about doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're all on the same page, and to me, it's the process, not the concept. The concept is needed, as Mr. Gaddis explained, as Mr. Doyle explained, but it's the process, whereas Mr. Manukian pointed out, one person could determine whether or not a candidate takes the exam or not, which I don't think is really fair.
Well,
Especially
we have an example in today, eligibility lists established under Office Service Specialist 2. It's a generic list. It's an open list. There was 371 applicants, and staff narrowed it down to 26 being eligible
Well,
for interviews.
Mr. Chair, maybe I can elaborate more on this. That's probably not a good example to use, because for a position at that level, we would in fact take everyone who's qualified and administer a written exam for, in the civic auditorium, some large facility where we're able to do that. But there are other types of exams, upper managerial positions, maybe executive level positions, where we'll get the 100 applications, 200 applications, and it becomes a process of sifting through those applications and identifying those who best meet the minimum qualifications. We may very, very well have 60 candidates who meet the minimum qualifications, but we may have 15 that are exceedingly well qualified that essentially become the ideal candidate if you were to look at all of the essential functions of the job, that person's experience, education, and so forth. And that's the circumstance that we would be talking about. We can only interview, realistically, 15, 20 people. The ability to interview 15 to 20 people versus 50 or 60. And when you say this makes it a very subjective process, it is a subjective process. And my staff, we're trained, and it's our professional ability to do this in a fair and ethical manner.
As a Director of Human Resources, you're also the what's the term I'm looking for? Chief Examiner.
Yes.
Correct?
That's correct.
It's part of your job.
That's exactly.
That's correct.
And I think that might answer your question.
And again,
Commissioner DeVry.
everyone who works in my office that has the responsibility for screening these applications, they are professionals, they are analysts, or people out here in the audience, and they take great, painstaking efforts to go through these applications to determine who's qualified, who's among the most qualified. And it's something that they take very seriously, and it isn't done in a vacuum either. I need to say that as well. The final decision does lie with my staff, but we do enable the departments to review application and provide their input. We may miss something, a particular aspect about someone's background that they have, but ultimately it is our responsibility, and it's our responsibility to do it effectively and fairly. And if someone does have a concern or feels that it's unfair, they can call us up. They can appeal. Generally, when they do call and have a question or a concern, we'll sit down with them and say, hey, here are your qualifications. Here's what the minimum qualifications are, and here's what the most highly qualified people had. And generally, that would suffice with most circumstances.
I have two more quick comments. And then,
Okay.
Number one, what prompted the need to put that in writing as opposed to just carrying on with what you're doing?
This was something that I felt was appropriate, just because we do have occasions where we'll have a candidate say, "But I qualify. I meet the qualifications. The job says you have to have a bachelor's degree and 2 years experience. I have that," and we often engage in this kind of dialogue with job applicants and have to say, "Well, that's wonderful, but these 25 other people have a bachelor's degree and they have 10 years of experience, and their experience is more relevant to the specific job that this is going to be." And it just, in my view, it would give us a little additional support for that particular position. So.
And the last question, in that process, do you set up any criteria that your staff follows or looks at so that there's something more than just a subjective, well, I think he's better, but I'm not sure?
Absolutely. Typically, in every one of these files, you will see, you can do it in any number of ways with Post-its or files, but generally we end up with 3 or 4 stacks, and it's, most highly qualified, the qualified, not qualified, and something along those lines. And it's usually based on a criteria that takes into account the minimum requirements of that job, the specific experience, and really the ideal qualifications of that particular position.
Okay.
And we only do this when we have the voluminous number of candidates. If we had a process where, say, we were planning to conduct 12 interviews over the course of one day, and we end up with, say, 5 very highly qualified candidates and 3 somewhat qualified candidates, in that circumstance, we would take all 8 and include them in. It's when we have the situation where there are 75 qualified candidates, and we really only have the ability to realistically interview maybe 12, or maybe we can take the interview process into 2 days and do 24, 25 candidates, that we would parse out those that meet the most highly, that are the most highly qualified.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on.
Okay. Next item is item 8. This was one that is being brought back at the request of the Commission. This would add a new section requiring the Commission's approval of the advertising plan for executive level positions. This particular recommendation is it essentially would grant the Commission a great deal of authority relative to the process that we would utilize under an executive recruitment process. Right now, all the bulletins for executive recruitment processes do come before you. Notwithstanding city auditor last week, but we corrected that. But the Commission can provide input and weigh in on various aspects of that bulletin and that process. This specific rule, as proposed, would give the Commission the authority to more or less weigh in on the advertising plan, where to advertise, whether or not to advertise, and again, this to a degree does take over a role that's done by the Human Resources Department, and in the case of executive recruitment, it's the city manager. But again, this item is being brought back for your recommendations. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This rule, am I correct, Matt, was one of the rules that was previously submitted to the City Council, and that was turned down at the City Council level, am I correct?
That's correct, yes.
And this would call, you're saying, for us to basically be involved in what kind of an advertising plan? Would that not, in my estimation, that might put our not our nose, but certainly part of our body, into basically what might be spent on a particular position in terms of, well, we'd rather have advertising going to 60 rather than, and that's not something we can do. It seems to me that the executive level type of situation is uniquely in the purview of the human resources, but more importantly, the city manager, who has the final word on well, not the final word, but certainly his recommendation goes to city council. I just really think that we're overextending our authority and possibly causing a non-unification of how this is to be done, and without, I don't know that that's really where we stand. We're in the testing business, we're in the civil service business. The executive level seems to me to be beyond. I truthfully would like to indicate it's not my recommendation that we pursue this particular rule, and that I would hope we could give staff direction not to proceed on this and basically eliminate it at this level so that we don't have to have them come back again if that's where we're going to vote. I think you want some sense of us, don't you, on certain rules? Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, it very well might come back. Mr. Stavros was here, and that was one of the items that he strongly supported.
No, he was against it.
He objected to it.
Is that correct? That's correct. Yeah, he objected to it, and I'm pretty sure is that also. I'm looking at Larry Ballesteros, and that's the police group also as opposed to it. Where is GMA? Did he leave? Oh, you're GMA. Where are we with GMA? Neutral. I like that. Where are you? Where's GCEA back there with the shining head? But,
He's getting there, don't worry.
you're getting there.
We're opposed to that.
Opposed to it also. I personally am also.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I had 4 questions regarding the necessity for that rule also, and Commissioner Gantis eloquently stated my position, so I concur, and I believe that should be eliminated.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Who asked for this to come back, Albert?
Commissioner Mnuchin, this was one of the 4 or 5 amendments from the previous iteration back in 2005 that Commissioner, I believe it was Commissioner Karen,
Because
I said it'd come back.
I agree with my fellow commissioners. I mean, if this has gone in front of the city council and this is not something they want to go down the path, I don't think we should either. It's my opinion. Okay.
Next rule.
So then I'd staff, Mr. Chairman, then that's going to not be brought back to us. Am I correct? Because of that, is that what you're looking for us to give you direction of whether it should come back?
I believe the direction is clear from the majority of the commissioners that this matter is, how should we put it, killed and will die. It will not be brought back in a final format. It will not be brought back at all.
Killed by consensus.
Killed by consensus.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'll proceed then. Amendment number 9 deals with Rule 4, and this is a section that talks about notification of job applicants, candidates who are involved in our selection process. And we'll come across this several times in the course of these amendments where reference is made to notification by U.S. mail. What we're proposing is that the applicant notification process be expanded to possibly include electronic mail in the notification of our processes. We're not quite there yet where we are doing everything by email. In fact, there are a lot of people who still don't have email in this day and age. But I think at some point in the near future we will be transitioning that way, and this involves the things like the notification of the exam dates, times of your exams, scoring, things like that. Actually, I'll change what I just said. We are already utilizing this with certain internal promotional recruitments where we know everyone has an email address and we're notifying them. obviously, it's quicker, it's more efficient, gets the information out faster, and we don't have to buy a postage stamp, so it saves costs. And again, when we're dealing with applicant pools numbering in the hundreds, and sometimes, when we do firefighter recruit, we'll end up with 2,000, 3,000 applicants. That's a big savings right there if we could simply do it by email. So we'll have a couple of these amendments that talk about moving away from exclusively U.S. mail.
All righty.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
have we got in our email? I mean, my concern is that obviously email is unbelievable now. But there's also times when if you're not, and we all have BlackBerries, we do, but maybe not everybody has a BlackBerry and an ability to do that. And of course, there are some people that really don't have computers, and their email access is going to the internet cafe or whatever.
Library.
Library, and we have such a short string. And I understand what you're doing. I'm very conflicted on this. We have such a short string on appeals, and what if they don't hear about an exam and they miss the exam? And I understand what you're saying. Do we have? See, but then you're saying if we get 2,000 or 3,000, can we track them all by return receipts? Well, that'll just clog up our emails even more. And then sometimes you may see, I get emails from Mr. Manukian that are put in my spam filter. I don't understand why. But
Never.
That's a joke. I'm kidding. But sometimes they
in
get
addition
triggered
to
into
the
that.
internet,
Sometimes that
right?
was a joke. They could go into a spam folder that may not be picked up for 2 or 3 days.
But I think this is in addition to the regular mail.
No, it's in lieu of.
Well, the language would be in addition to regular mail. But what I'm saying is that it's someday we will be here, probably sooner rather than later.
Well, I think
we're handling it all.
When we come to that point, we can, discuss it and make a definitive answer on it. But right now, we absolutely have to continue using the U.S. mail because there are so many people that do not have access to email.
That's correct, and
That's not what
I know of other agencies that are moving towards email, and everyone's kind of doing it slowly. But there are systems in place to make sure.
Doing it both, but I think you have to do it.
And I think that's what it says, in addition to U.S. mail.
Correct.
No, it does not say in
Yes,
addition.
it does.
No, it
Yes,
does
it
not.
does.
No, it doesn't.
Says
I'm reading the language.
says in addition
All right.
to U.S. mail.
Applicant notification shall be. I'm looking at the rule. I'm looking at the rule. Applicant notification of examination shall be made by U.S. mail, email, or personal service.
Or personal service.
It's either one. I mean, if your point is that you want to do both, that's not what the rule says.
Yeah, because on here it says in addition to U.S. mail, so I think this needs to reflect that.
That's not.
You know what that's
And Commissioners, I'd be happy to phrase it any way you like. I just, again, wanted to get away from saying that it has to be U.S. mail. That's, again, this is the rules that we're going to live with for a number of years. We may not come back to this for 5 years or 10 years, and it would be our desire to provide that flexibility. What I've seen in other organizations that are moving to this is that they have a fail-safe for people without email addresses, or people who have. Some cities are doing the application process completely online. We're not quite there yet, but all of these systems have a fail-safe for people who either don't have access to a computer, and they want to turn in the application in paper, and we would be sensitive to that, because we don't want to leave people hanging out there. So
I think we're all on board, but I don't think we have reached that point to correct me if I'm wrong. Is that not your understanding too, Chairman? That at this stage, I think we must send out the U.S. mail.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I have.
What page were you reading from?
We're on
John?
page 16. Section 5.
Right. Applicant notification of examination shall be made by mail or personal service.
Email.
Email, or personal service.
Yeah, Chair Coleman is reading from the existing.
You're reading the existing.
We're reading the existing rules. This is the change we're talking about.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Howard,
I thought you said you were reading.
I was
rule.
reading from the rule that's being proposed, which is on page 16 of our rules. You have the summary from them, and the rules are behind that.
Got it.
I would propose, Mr. Chairman, that we add to whatever our application process that there is allowing the applicant to authorize use of email, specifically with an email address and a signature, and that we say that it would be U.S. mail or personal service or email where authorized. That way, we can get a specific. We might not get everybody, but we could probably cut out a third to a half and make a savings there. But still, if we don't get an authorization for email, then we have to use U.S. mail. Does that work for everybody?
That works for me.
U.S. mail, email, you said as
U.S.
authorized?
mail or personal service or email where authorized.
And Mr. Chairman, just to add, I think that's a good amendment. There are a number of people that I've had contact with in my recruitments over the last number of years that actually prefer email. In fact, they specifically requested to please send any correspondence by email to an email address. This way, by putting I hate to use the word, but putting the burden or giving the opportunity to the applicant then make that choice, which would relieve the Human Resources Department of having to mail by hard copy to every single individual.
Certainly.
Many may elect to have email, and as Mr. Doyle said, perhaps a number of years from now, the percentage requesting email will tilt far closer towards 75-80% than it is now. So it seems like a reasonable compromise that could be workable if Mr. Doyle agrees.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to item number 10. This is a similar section of the rules which addresses, I think, the list of equal employment opportunity protected categories, where we have updated and added the phrase "or any protected category under the law," and we will also replace the word handicap with disability, as we had done prior. Item number 11. This has to do, again, with executive recruitment processes. This is an amendment that, again, was asked by the Commission to be returned from the previous process 5 years ago. And this was the recommendation that whenever community panels are utilized for executive recruitments, that staff conduct an open solicitation of interview panels when this occurs. This is a suggestion, again, once before that came before the Commission and was rejected by the City Council. I want to state this particular recommendation is not something that I, as the HR director, would not support.
Would or would not?
I would not support this.
How is it handled now?
When we have an executive recruitment process, it's the solicitation is handled by myself and the city manager. We identify people who are within the community who are interested in participating in these panels and may have been involved in whatever aspect of that particular profession. And we simply select those individuals. This would make, to some degree, create a selection process within a selection process, where we would have people contacting my office and saying, hey, I'd like to be on the interview panel for police chief or fire chief or IS director or whatever the case may be. And from a personal standpoint, that would create a bit of a burden on me to develop some type of a criteria for accepting someone or not. we may have individuals who no one's ever heard of, or people who perhaps might not have any credibility wanting to be on an interview panel, and I would be in the position of having to say yes or no, and it's not something that I would want to be part of. Again, this is a function that is currently handled by my office in conjunction with the city manager, and again, a great deal of thought goes into the selection of these panels, as we would for any process, whether it's an executive or a management position or a field position. And again, this is one of those areas where I don't feel it would be appropriate to sort of throw this out to anyone who shows an interest in wanting to be on one of these panels. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, Chris, you're the Firefighters Association is opposed to that, correct? And I assume the police also, GMA, I would assume so also, GCEA as well. This is to me it would be a bad precedent. It would create delays. More importantly, I think it creates a level that is intrusive into the, while it sounds select and et cetera, part of why you select somebody, these interview panels and how they consider things are confidential. And we need to be sure that we have people on there that we can trust to keep that confidentiality and use their discretion, because otherwise I think it opens up to us to people that may, anybody that wants to be on there, and then if they're not chosen, then it becomes a Glendale News Press, oral communications, and I think creates a real troublesome aspect to the selection process, which could be have a chilling effect on those who would apply, because it might subject those people to having, a lot of times on executive positions, you're going to have an executive from another city, and again, this is not something that needs to be publicized. I think this would be a bad precedent. It's certainly not something I could support.
Again, why is it here?
Same reason.
Commissioner Manukian, it was here because the Commission directed us to bring this item back from the previous set of rule amendments.
And councils looked at this and they weren't for it, turned it down?
They turned it down. And Mr. Stavros, I just wanted to say I'm a flatliner in my right ear, and I simply misheard you.
No problem.
Okay?
Yeah, no problem.
So I certainly wasn't trying to put words in your mouth.
All right.
Okay, doke.
That's his job.
Mr. Chair.
Wanted to make that clear.
Mr. Chair.
You, the police, everybody.
Mr. Chair.
I love you.
Yes.
I also concur with my two colleagues, and in addition, I have full confidence that both our city manager and our director of human resources has more than an ability to select qualified panelists for these types of interviews, and to go to any other process, I think, would be totally without merit. So I would support not adopting this rule change.
Appears, Mr. Chair, the consensus is that this rule will be essentially taken off calendar. It will not be brought back
That is correct.
for consideration.
Census to kill.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll proceed with item number 12. This is similar to item number 9, talking about the notification process. This, I believe, addresses following an examination, and I will go ahead and make the same language as suggested by Commissioner Gantis for this particular amendment. Item number 13 is this was a recommendation by Commissioner Chair Coleman to add the phrase discriminatory as a possible ground for an appeal of an examination process. Chair Coleman has had a meeting with myself and Mr. Howard on this particular item, and I think what's been proposed has been modified slightly, I think, to the satisfaction of Chair Coleman, and that's the separate handout that you received. And perhaps either Chair Coleman or Mr. Howard would like to elaborate on the reasons, therefore.
We support it.
Everybody's on board on this?
Yep.
Okay. I'm in the human resources. Okay. I'm for it.
Thank you.
Number 14 relates to what we would call the methodology for breaking ties in our examination processes. This section 2C of Rule 5 within the rules talks about the how examinations are scored and how, in the case of a tie, that tie is to be broken. The last time that our internal audit department reviewed our examination processes, they came across this particular item and had some very good questions about this language as it currently exists. We read it, and quite frankly, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to us either. Essentially says that tie breaking will be done, and it's based on the sequence of an exam weights, provided that the exam components are equally weighted. And it really didn't make much sense to us. What we're proposing is something that would provide a very clear priority order for breaking numeric ties in our exam scores based on the type of exams, and also recognize this particular dimension that we call overall likelihood of success as a further means of breaking these ties. What we would end up with is the first method of breaking a tie would be to go to the most heavily weighted examination component, and whoever scored the highest on that would be our first method of breaking a tie. So, for example, if we had an examination process that involved both a written exam and an oral board, the written exam was worth 25%, the oral board 75%, and two individuals had the same score. We would look to the oral exam, which would be worth 75%. Whoever scored highest there would be the first method of breaking a tie. If beyond that, if there is an additional tie, let's say they happen to have the same score in that selection process, we would go to the second level. If we'd look at other methods of breaking that tie. If, for example, you had an examination process where you have 2 or even 3 processes, tests that are equally weighted. Say you have a written worth 50% and an oral worth 50%. The proposed language would make wherever you have an equally weighted set of examination processes, the oral would be the highest priority, the performance, and then the written in that order. Another method of breaking a tie would be to look at the what we would call the overall likelihood of success dimension, which we utilize on all of our oral board processes. If there's an exam process that has that dimension and the candidates are tied, we would look at that particular dimension and assign it the most weight. This process, I understand this is very confusing, and as I'm explaining it to you, I'm getting confused myself, but essentially I think it's
how uplifting,
clearer than what we had before. And if you'll see it, if you continue to have ties process after process, it goes to service time, seniority, and then it all the way down to the date of the application received if you end up with a tie. And we really don't want to determine someone's score or rank based on something that innocuous. So what we've tried to do is consider all the different options of all the different examinations that we could potentially have, and have some clear method for staff to go through and break ties. So after all that, happy to try and answer your questions. Oh, thank you. Actually, the staff, we had several meetings on this, and it.
And this was recommended by internal audit?
Internal audit did a review of our hiring processes, and we have them do performance audits, well, throughout the organization. And one of the areas they looked at was our hiring process and our certification and examination process. And this was something that, in a written report that they prepared, stated that this is something that needed to be fixed and clarified. So that's what we're attempting to do here.
Okay. Number 15?
That is probably the most confusing one you'll see tonight. This is in the same general area, number 15. There's some, I would say, contradictory language in the language that would seemingly allow for tie scores in an examination, as well as the potential for the consideration of more than three eligibles on a certification process, which conflicts with what the charter says about the rule of three. What this section says is that I'll read it for you. This is on page 24. It currently says when there are multiple vacancies under one appointing authority, if two or more vacant positions in the same class exist under one appointing authority and no appropriate layoff lists exist, 3 names, and for some reason it says plus ties for the first vacancy and 1 additional name for each additional vacancy may be certified to the appointing authority. We have always operated under the impression that ties must be broken, and that when the rule of 3 is employed, that it means just that. It's 3, and that we find a way to break a tie. If we have 5 candidates who have all scored 100%, and our charter and civil service rules indicate that we have the rule of 3, well, we're not able to accept all those 5. We have to break the tie. So what this would do is, in that section D and E, remove the words plus ties to indicate very clearly that we have just three candidates who'd be eligible for certification. Questions?
Okay. Any comments? Let's move on.
Okay. Item number 16 would eliminate the requirement that candidates under consideration be notified in writing of appointment opportunities. And the scenario for this is when and you may not agree with this, so I lay it all out here. But essentially, when we certified names to an eligibility list, and it's actually Ms. Mallon's job to contact those individuals. Very often the departments are very anxious to get their 3 names, and Ms. Mallon has to currently go through a process of identifying those next 3 names on the list, and according to these rules indicates that they must be notified in writing. And typically, it causes delays in the process, and oftentimes we don't hear back from someone. And I guess similar to the email circumstance, we want the ability to make contact with these candidates and truly make a legitimate attempt to get hold of them, whether it's their telephone, their cell phone, email, whatever the case. Ms. Mallon's very thorough about that, but not necessarily require that contact to be made in writing. Because sometimes we'll get a situation where we won't hear back from someone, they don't call back, and then we'll have to wait a few days, give them some reasonable time, and then we'll go on to the next name. And meanwhile, the department is sitting there waiting for their names. So we would just like, again, staff to have the ability to have a little flexibility to use other modes of contacting individuals when their names are reached on a list.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have the same concern about this scenario that we just discussed for the previous in writing versus email situation. And I think if we amend this to kind of follow suit with what we did in the other ones, where perhaps, as Mr. Gant has suggested, that we give the candidates a choice or let them notify us or Human Resources on how they want to be notified, whether it be in writing or email or phone. But to delete this thing, and I'm really concerned about the wording where it says the director of HR will attempt. And to me, that really doesn't make a positive notification, because they can say, we attempted, but you didn't answer your phone, and possibly the candidate could lose a promotion that way. So I don't think we need to change the concept. It's just that we ought to give them a choice, as we did with the other one.
I fully agree with you, Commissioner Devine, and I would suggest that we use the exact same language here that Commissioner Gant suggested on the previous one. Yes.
I disagree. This is not the same thing. This is where you actually have maybe 3, 4, 5 people that you're contacting for the position. And what this allows, if it's in writing, as I understand it, Debbie not only writes to them, but she calls them up. They have cell phones. This is a little bit of a different thing where she's much more, not so much she, that position, whoever does it. Am I correct on that, Matt? It's really more than one way of contacting, so that we can have the quickest way possible to get them in, so that so they know where they are, so that, number one, maybe they're not taking another job, so they know they're eligible and they can wait for the choice. I think we need to give this is a very limited group, and I think we need to give the staff that flexibility to do anything: telephone, email. I just think in this case this is okay, because again, it's not that large group of 3,000, but rather people that we really want to hire. So we're going to go the extra effort to contact them, because we want them on that list. And giving her that flexibility means that she can do anything, which includes not waiting to do a letter, put it in the mail that might get lost. She's on the phone as well, so I think we need to give them that flexibility.
Excuse me.
I disagree.
Yeah, I think it's a safeguard issue that we're talking about. We're not talking about. I think they should be notified in writing, even if she makes a contact, or especially when she doesn't make a contact via telephone. This is just sending something in writing, notifying them. Contact is a contact. I mean, I understand your thought of narrowing it down, but still,
I suppose you could still telephone as well. So, all right, that's fine.
Absolutely, use the telephone, and like you indicated before,
Well, at least we could put the email in there.
The email.
So give them the choice, but don't
give them a choice.
But do they use telephone? Do you use telephone a lot on these situations, or no?
Currently, I always send what's known as a certification letter, but then, of course, mail can take time. The department wants to contact the person for a hiring interview. If they have difficulty reaching the candidate, it always is through HR. They let us know, and we phone the candidate, or we may email. We make every attempt to get a hold of them. But we additionally send a second letter. We're unable to contact you, and give them like 5 business days to get back to us. So that's where it starts becoming long.
Matt, why is that process? How do you? Why does that? Why does that process? If we're phoning anyway, why is and in writing means it can be with an email notification as well. Why does that process need to be changed? Maybe I'm now agreeing with him.
Again, the attempt was to make it a little more flexible. Instead of, it says specifically that this notification will be done in writing. And
or by email where authorized. Same. I think that's the way to do this.
Certainly
That's
live with
the
that.
way I would go.
Or by email where authorized.
That's where.
Does that work for you, Debbie? I think that gives us both, but you can still phone. It doesn't say you can't phone.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to suggest that they remove the wording or the word attempt, and I think the Director of Human Resources will notify the certified eligibles with the word attempt in there, that's kind of not too solid in my mind.
I agree.
I agree. Let's remove it.
How about Sam? We didn't hear from Sam.
Doesn't matter what Sam says. I do agree, of course.
I still love
And just so the record is clear, Matt, I believe we're also going to remove the word written under subparagraph A, so it'll say notification. Now that there's an option elected by the applicant to receive notice either by mail or email.
I think we were going to leave the words in writing.
No.
In the heading.
The actual word written. Right?
Oh, I see.
No.
Notification.
So in
Say
the old
notification.
language, it'll just say subsection A, notification.
Okay. But we're adding, or by me email where authorized.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if that's okay, I'll move on to item 17. This was another item brought back from the prior rule amendment process. This was a recommendation by the Commission that a section be added addressing that the department would be required to get the Commission's approval should they decide.
Which
I'm on number 17.
okay.
Okay. That the Commission approval would be required should they decide to cancel a certification from a promotional reallocation examination for reasons other than budgetary. This is an item which, in my 20 years, it's come up only one time. Promotional reallocation examinations are those where a position is budgetarily reallocated from one level to another. And when we do have this situation, we will put a bulletin up that will say promotional reallocation exam. I think the safeguard or the reason this is being brought up is that we did have a situation probably 7 or 8 years ago where an individual person's position was being reallocated from one level to another. That individual competed for the job in a testing process and failed to score within the top 3, therefore was unreachable. The department, rather than proceed to fill that position, they chose to not fill it, because had they done so and selected someone else, there would not have been a job for that individual whose position was reallocated, if that makes sense to you. It was purely a budgetary type of decision, and the individual who was involved in that particular situation had a concern, and I believe that concern was raised before the Commission, which prompted members of the Commission to consider this adding this language. So what this would do is, in those circumstances, that if the department decides that, hey, we don't want to fill this position because the individual whose position was being reallocated is not reachable on the list, then they would be required to come before the Commission and explain why that they are choosing not to fill the position. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is one also that was presented previously to the City Council and rejected, is that correct?
yes.
This, again, was one that I opposed at the time, and I would oppose again. Again, this I think extends beyond what our authority is, and would create a situation where the appointing authority could have a difficulty filling that particular position if in fact they wanted to do that. It may not get the most qualified. So it's been already vetted to the City Council. They've turned it down. I see no reason for us to reinvent the wheel and re-bring it back.
I couldn't agree more.
I concur also. Also, if you read Section 8, the next paragraph down, you'd see that really trumps the proposed Section 7. So
Correct.
Section 7 really has no meaning, because the same thing can be accomplished by following the rules of Section 8, which have been in the rules for some time. So I concur with my fellow commissioners.
And
Deleting this item.
That's just a kill.
Mr. Doyle, before we go into Rule Amendments 18 and 19. I'm going to suggest that they be deleted
Same reason.
from being put forth to the City Council for consideration.
Same reason, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
I agree.
I concur.
Which items?
17, 18, and 19.
17, 18, and 19. Boot. Off the chart. So that moves us on to number 20.
Number 20, and this is a rather important item for consideration. This has to do with really adding a new section involving the extension of a probationary period while an employee is not performing the essential functions of their position due to their placement on a temporary modified basis. If I could kind of elaborate on this, if an employee is on some form of leave during their probationary period, whether they have a workers' comp injury or some type of a devastating illness where they're out for a month or 2 or 3, right now there are provisions in place which would enable that person to their probationary period to be extended in order to have that person, when they come back, truly give the supervisor, the manager, the ability to evaluate that person's performance for the full period of that probationary period, whether it's a 6-month probation or a 1-year probation. Often occurs in the course of someone's probationary period if they have this type of a disabling injury, illness, or something like that. In some cases, they are brought back to work on a temporary modified basis, and they're not performing the essential functions of their job, but they are performing some work that would benefit the city. They're doing something, but it may not be directly related to the work that they currently do. As it currently stands right now, employees in that situation, there's really no mechanism for extending a probationary period for an individual in that circumstance. And a good example of this would be, say, a police officer, or let's say a police sergeant who is on probation as a police sergeant. They're injured, yet they're able to come back and work at the front desk, but they may not be performing the duties of a police sergeant. We would like to have the ability to extend that individual's probationary period where we could see a full probationary period amount of time of them actually performing the work of a police sergeant. Right now there are some limits preventing us from doing that. The same thing would apply of a maintenance worker or someone who does heavy manual labor, who gets injured, has to be out for 3 months, yet instead of sitting at home doing nothing, watching soap operas, we'll bring them in, let them do work. They're not actually on leave. They're simply on temporary modified duty. And again, they may be in the office answering phones or providing customer service or some other thing. So what we would like to do is provide a mechanism for the extension of that individual's probationary period. Again, so the supervisor has the ability to analyze that person actually doing the job that they were hired to do for the full probationary period. So,
any objections to that addition?
Nope.
Hearing none. Let's move on to 21.
Okay. Item number 21, this is something that staff is being proposed, and this is really to comport with what our current practice is. Many years ago, the hourly employees were not permitted to apply for promotional examination processes. We have since actually amended the rules, and the rules do now allow for somebody with the equivalent of 6 months full-time experience, or I think we'd say 1,040 hours, to apply for a promotional position. And for many, many years, it was the current language addresses that it's under the discretion of the HR director as to whether or not to allow someone to apply and compete for a position. My preference would be to just simply state very clearly that these individuals would be eligible as long as they have the time and grade and, of course, meet the qualifications for the position, and sort of leave the discretion out of it. There really never has been any specific criteria for why we would let some in some instances and why not. So that's our recommendation, that that the language be changed to be consistent with
Great idea.
practices.
I'm in full favor of it.
Okay.
Any objections?
No. Okay. Item 22 is simply cleanup. For whatever reason, the term medical transfer was not included in this section, which deals with transfers. So we're just adding that term along with the other forms of transfer. The medical transfers are addressed in Rule 3 as well.
Correct. Number 23.
23. Yes, this is the section which deals with investigations and disciplinary action. And this, right now, there are some very set criteria as far as the circumstances where an employee would be placed on administrative leave. And one of them is that the individual under indictment can be placed on administrative leave. And what we want to indicate that not only someone who's been indicted but also facing a criminal charge, that would be an appropriate reason to place somebody on administrative leave. I've just broadened that definition a little more. And I'll remind you, administrative leave is paid leave as well, so it's not...
Even under these circumstances, huh?
Even under these circumstances. Innocent until proven guilty.
Okay. 24?
When do we get paid?
24, and I'll take 24 and 25 at the same time. Really, these are areas that we would like to add to the area of under charges for disciplinary action. The first one on number 24 would be a new charge relating to the misuse or abuse of any city benefit. This is something that comes up occasionally, and we want to make sure that there's a specific charge listed in the rules that would address it. What am I talking about? Things like workers' compensation fraud, or the fraudulent use of medical benefit, medical insurance, or the misuse of leaves, that sort of thing. So again, misuse or abuse of any city benefit. Number 25 is adding a new charge relating to accessing confidential information. And this is a big area, and it's a growing area, having to do with dealing with confidential information. You hear a lot about some of the cases in the news involving hospitals and other entities leaking information on celebrities and things like that. Well, as an organization, we have lots of information on people, applicants for our jobs, people, utilities, police department, obviously, finance department. We want to make sure that the whole issue of confidentiality is dealt with in a very firm manner, in that the misuse of confidential information by our employees are appropriately addressed within the rules. That would be 24 and 25.
3 more. Any objections to those? Number 26.
Item 26, under the same section, this is kind of an interesting issue that comes up, but it's the charge under the cause for disciplinary action dealing with someone who tests positive for drugs. And it basically would remove the words "without legal prescription" from the positive drug test language. due mainly to the use of medical marijuana, although which very often is dispensed with a physician's recommendation. I state in the report that even though California law has decriminalized the use of medical marijuana, employers, including the City of Glendale, may continue to retain very firm anti-drug use policies for our safety and safety in the workplace. So what I don't want to get is someone either a drug screen of some sort coming back testing positive for marijuana and then saying, wait a minute, I have the legal right to do so. Here's my doctor's note. That may be valid. That may protect them from criminal prosecution. But someone working for us, driving a city truck, driving a police vehicle, or out there doing work on behalf of the City of Glendale, we certainly don't want them under the influence of any drug, including marijuana.
Brainer.
Okay.
Is this specifically for the use of medical marijuana or any other?
That's the impetus of this particular amendment.
Okay.
Because, again, what it says now is, well, see if I can read it. What it says now is addicted to or under the influence of alcohol or intoxicating drugs, or has tested positive in any drug, tested positive without legal prescription in any drug, alcohol, marijuana screening test. So it's taking out that without legal prescription language.
Okay. Any objections to this rule amendment?
No.
Okay.
Okay, we have
Number 27.
like two left, and this is a it's a
Interesting one.
very interesting one. I know Mr. Howard will have some comments. This was something recommended by Commissioner Devine. And this is a proposal that if a portion of the commission, on disciplinary appeal hearing cases, if a portion of the commission consisting of at least 3 or more commissioners hears the appeal, makes the determination that panel or subset of the commission have the ability to make the final determination without reporting back to the full commission. And the idea behind this is that if a subset of the commission spends hours and hours going through witness testimony and the hearing, that then they have to, and they make a determination and then have to come back to the full commission to have commissioners who played no role in that hearing try and come up to speed on what was discussed. That makes it a little bit awkward, and depending on the extent that those commissioners who weren't involved in that hearing are able to either listen to the transcripts or come up to speed on it, it just makes it somewhat of an awkward situation, and to some degree creates almost double the work. So this is being thrown out there, and Mr. Devine will probably want to elaborate more on it, and I know Mr. Howard has something to say on it as well. So, Mr. Chair.
Well, before I elaborate, this all depended on whether or not the concept was legal. And I had talked with Mr. Howard some time ago, and he was doing some research. So until we hear from him as to whether or not it's even possible to do, I'll reserve my comments.
And Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I am still researching this, and I will tell you where the research has taken me so far. The focus is now on the phrase authorized representative. And what I've been doing is first searching the archives of opinions in our office to determine whether or not an attorney in my office has already opined on the issue of whether a number less than the whole of the commission is considered a quote-unquote authorized representative, or was it the intent of the voters when they enacted this section to really reference a third party, that is an arbitrator, mediator, hearing officer, or someone else. So I am currently not concluded with that research. if my research reveals that it was the will of the electorate that the phrase authorized representative in the context of Article 24, Section 9 was intended to include a number lesser than the whole of the commission, then the inquiry stops there and the rule wouldn't be able to implement a rule to allow less than the whole. But at this point, I'm still researching, and so I don't have an answer for you today. It took me down a path that I thought was going to be a lot easier than it was. And so ultimately you will receive a complete and detailed written opinion that may ultimately give you the ability to modify the rule to allow for a lesser number of the commission to not only hear, but also make a final determination. But I can't give you that quote-unquote final determination tonight.
Are we being billed by the hour?
Huh?
Are we being billed by the hour?
I wish.
No, don't go down that path, Mr. Howard.
We don't have a budget.
In all seriousness, the research has already been started. We're a good way through it, so hopefully by the time we have our next meeting, you'll have a full written opinion.
Chairman.
Right. Yes.
I would like to just proffer my opposition to this under any circumstance. I think we're all appointed to be members of the Civil Service Commission, and I can recall one hearing specifically where having the 5 members was extremely important to a particular finding, and it was a very difficult case, and the vetting of it I thought was extremely important to have all 5 members. That is not the case on most of them. Most of them are fairly perfunctory, but I think we're all appointed. We're charged with the discipline. And I would not be in favor, even if it is legal, of having a lesser number. I don't know how the rest of my commissioners feel. I just think that we're abdicating some responsibilities that in some cases are very important responsibilities.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I agree to some extent with Commissioner Gantis. However, by changing the rule to allow less than the full commission to make the final decision would not preempt the possibility of having all 5 members in a case such as you described, where it's important or would be important to have 5 members. So I think the rule change would give us the flexibility on the cases that you say are most prevalent to have just 3 members make a decision on. And in a case where you have a controversy, then we could certainly have the option of going to the full commission.
And, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Devine, that is not the way the rule is currently formatted. I probably wouldn't have a problem with that if it were formatted such that upon assignment of the, quote, authorized representative, the commission votes whether or not that body has the authority to make the final decision. And that's all prefaced, obviously, on his legal research. But if it were done that way, I would agree with that. But it's not written that way now. So maybe then what we should do, I was trying to see if maybe we do need the legal research. But I would suggest, Mr. Doyle, assuming the rest of the commissioners agree with Mr. Devine and I, that we rephrase this such that what it is that while it's the full commission, the commission, again subject to his legal research, has can vote to appoint the, quote, authorized representative and give that authorized representative the power to make a final decision. So in other words, it's the full body that says, okay, this is the 3, and this body will have the final the authority to make a final decision.
So if I understand, the full commission can delegate.
Again, if we can.
If we can.
It's left to the full the commission, which right now we can appoint the authorized representative, in this case 3, no less than 3, and that the commission has the option of also delegating to that 3 panel the power to make a final decision. That's subject to his legal research.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that this may be one of those sections also that's subject to meet and confer as well, assuming the research reveals that the charter permits the flexibility to amend the rule consistent with your discussions tonight. Because it's been a practice, and the rule's been in place for so long that it's become essentially a practice that would be subject to meet and confer, to change it from the full commission to a rule that would allow less than the full commission to actually not only hear, but make a final determination.
Well, I think we haven't heard from Commissioner Coleman or Commissioner Manukian, but I think we're on the same track. At least let the research be done and see what the next step is going to be. And I have no objection or concern about the suggestion made by Commissioner Gantis in revising the rule. So I think we're heading in the right direction. There is one other thing, Chair, if I may.
Certainly.
On Section B, Section 9, Section B, Paragraph 2, in reading that, I find it to be rather awkward both grammatically and contextually, and I propose some new wording which I think may make it a little clearer. It won't change the concept of what it's doing, but where it says now, the Commission shall review the same and make its determination, adopting the determination of the authorized representative or making its determination of the matter. I read that about 8 times trying to figure out what it meant, and I changed the wording on it and to say the Commission shall review the same and make a decision either to adopt, amend, or revise the determination of the authorized representative. And
Not even an engineer can get language correct. That's good news.
it's unusual, but occasionally it happens.
Become a lawyer, Art.
Right.
Commissioner Devine, can you repeat what you just
Yes.
said?
Yeah, let's go with that new language.
I like the new language.
The wording would say the Commission shall review the same and make a decision either to adopt, amend, or revise the determination of the authorized representative.
Officer?
Got the language in the charter?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Larry Ballesteros, Vice President of the GPOA. I'm not counting on Mr. Howard's research. We'll see what comes up. I'm not real comfortable with it. And the reason for is we end up in front of you, the Commission, much more than any of the other associations. When we do, when we do end up in front of you, it's a matter of life or death for that officer's job. And my interpretation of the Civil Service Commission is the fact that we have 5 gentlemen, 5 people, commissioners that have been chosen by the city to represent them. We should get 5 people to hear the case. Now, I understand people's lives are very busy, and I can understand the getting 3 people to do that would make it much easier than having a meeting every night for a week with 5 people, because that would interrupt people's lives. I get that. But it's one of those things where I signed up for this job, and God forbid I ever have to give my life in the line of duty. If something comes up where it's a trial, I would really respect and expect to be heard by 5 members of the Commission.
Sir, let me be very clear that, and I've been on this commission for a number of years, if there is a police officer that makes an appeal before the Civil Service Commission, 99.9% of the time, there's 5 commissioners hearing the case.
That's not true.
And that's been my experience.
Mr. Chairman?
I agree with Mr. Ballesteros. Absolutely.
And I agree with your comments.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, I've been on the commission as well a number of years, and just so we do have 3 hearing panels, and we don't always have 5 that hear this.
Not all.
5 consider the final decision. I assume that's what you're saying, because the ones I've been on, the police ones, which are probably a majority of the ones that have been in the last 10 years, they have been 3 panels.
Right.
I've not been on one where the police have been heard by 5, but they've been, the final determination is made by 5, and I probably would agree with you there. That would be my decision in any time they did it. But
If and subject to meet and confer also, if that's the way we've been doing it in the past. Fortunately for me, I've never had to be in front of you for anything other than being a witness, and that's where I want to keep it. But I would like, if that's the way it's going to go, and that's the way it's been in the past, because I do remember being a witness for a fellow officer, and there were 5 members of the commission on the. I can tell you later which case it was. We can. Never can stay out of that one. But I'm just looking out for my association, for my members, just to make sure that
Understand that
you get a
and
full
fully
shake.
appreciate your concerns.
Thank you very much,
On the
Chair.
same page.
Thank you.
So we're going to just hold off on that particular one, subject to
Yeah.
legal, and then we'll come back. But it may
Absolutely.
be subject to meet and confer.
Yes.
Just so the record is clear, Commissioner Devine, good catch on the language of Section 9B2. A lot of that language actually comes out of the what I'll call somewhat antiquated language from the Charter. And what I'd recommend is making the changes you suggested while still retaining some of the language of the Charter. For example, using the phrase modify, and actually I'll so I don't misquote it, adopting, modifying, or revoking, which is the language that comes out of the Charter. But they do redundantly use, even in the Charter, the term determination of the determination. So, good catch.
Okay.
But we're going to use his language with
Yes.
just those little modifications.
small modifications.
Fine.
Fine.
Could you repeat them, Mr. Howard?
The wording in the Charter, adopting,
Adopt.
modifying, or revoking.
Okay.
That's in the context of a determination from an author or by an authorized representative.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, number 28.
Mr. Chair, number...
That is the last one, folks.
Theoretically.
Mr. Chair, number 28 deals on applying a little, I would say, an additional rule relative to our employees who resign, and basically proposing that upon resignation, that the language be put in that the employee must separate from employment prior to beginning new employment unless otherwise approved by the department head and the city manager. This item came up a while back, and really it's to deal with the procedure for resignation. We have had situations where an employee will submit his or her resignation for some future date and run out their vacation leave, but in the meantime start a new job with another agency before they're officially separated from the city of Glendale. What we would like to do is establish separation date from here and then have that occur prior to any start date at an additional job. Essentially, we don't want an individual working for two employers at the same time for reasons of liability, conflict of interest, workers' comp potential.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I agree. But my question is this. What happens if it is not? In other words, somebody submits their resignation and you don't know that they went off to work somewhere else. I don't see what... I mean, you get a notice today that they're leaving June 30th, and they run out vacation, sick leave, or whatever they can do, and then they start April 1st. Can we expand that to say, in the event that doesn't happen, that the effective date of the resignation would be the day before they've started their new job, so that we would have an ability, if that's allowed, I don't know that we can legally do that, to say, well, we've overpaid you, so now we want our money back.
So, Chair, members of the Commission, while that sounds good and it makes some sense, I think legally the ice becomes quite thin, to borrow from the current Olympics. It becomes, I think, somewhat problematic to attempt to try to get an overpayment based on something like that. Perhaps this is one of those issues where we're just going to have to rely on the ability to find out if that occurs. The person would be subject to disciplinary action, but the reality is, if they're gone, they're gone. And so I think this is one of those issues where some may slip through the cracks, and others may be caught and dealt with accordingly. But I think this was intended more to provide the message and the means of trying to assure that individuals don't resign from the city, start another job, and subject us to the possible workers' comp, other liability, and conflict of interest issues that might arise if you're essentially serving two masters or serving in two different employment capacities with different employers.
Would this be subject to meet and confer as well?
Question.
Well, it's interesting to
Matt
note
on this one.
It's interesting to note that it's submitted by staff upon recommendation of the city manager.
Well, I'm all for it.
So am I.
Paying somebody while they work. But let's move on.
Anybody disagree?
Guess we have to wait on.
Okay. Next item.
Okay, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I do have one other item that hasn't been included, that I don't know if it's appropriate to bring it up now on
fire
the
away.
rules. This is on page 35. It's dealing with the transfer requests and approval.
What section, Mr.?
We're looking at Section 2, Paragraph C, Item 4. And on this one, it requires for a similar qualification transfer and lower qualification transfers approval of the Civil Service Commission. And when you look at the other transfers under A and B, interdepartmental and intra-departmental transfers, the commission approval is not required. My question is, why after, again under C, after written approval from all department heads involved, written approval from the employee asking for the transfer, and written approval by the Director of Human Resources, why does the Civil Service Commission need to become involved with that issue? And I know we've had several of these come before us, and normally the first question that comes up by one or the other commissioners is, why are we hearing this after there's been 3 levels of approval already? So unless my colleagues have an objection, I would suggest that
I think it's a good question.
that item be deleted.
I remember you asking for this. I remember this question came up.
Yeah, and I'm the one that said, why are we here? Mr. Scott, do you have any insight into?
The question would be, and it would be something that I'd like to take a look at and bring back along with the research on I'm calling it rule change number 27.
Okay.
That deals with subsection 9 to determine if the charter requires the commission to approve these transfers. If it does not, then a rule change that would eliminate it. It probably does not, but I don't want to shoot from the hip.
Let's just make that rule change 29 proposed by Commissioner Devine and subject to legal research. I'm in favor of it if it passes muster.
Mr. Chair, I can affirmatively state that this is not required by the Charter, although this language has been here as long as I've been around. My assumption would be that it was placed there just to make sure when you're taking somebody from one job classification and putting them into another one, that there's some safeguard to ensure that this is an appropriate action to be taken. It has gone through, all the levels of review you cite, but I think, why this historically is here is probably for that reason. If you'll note, the other types of transfers, the intradepartmental, the interdepartmental, deal with the same classification. I'm an administrative analyst working in the planning department, and I'm transferring to become an administrative analyst in the Parks and Recreation department. That's relatively innocuous. You're taking somebody in the same job and just moving them into a different department. That shouldn't require the Commission's approval. The similar qualification transfer, lower qualification transfer, is taking that, a judgment is being made that administrative analyst is going to be moved to another classification, such as a systems analyst or on a lower qualifications transfer. It could be taking the individual who's an administrative analyst and making them an administrative associate in either that department or another department. So it's just, I think
if you guys have approved it, if everybody down the line has approved it, who are we to?
What additional information could 5 lay people have that the professionals didn't have in making 3 determinations that it was all right?
Mr. Chairman.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Doyle has convinced me that maybe we shouldn't make the change. And I'll tell you why. He refreshed my recollection of one that we had recently, and I believe we had one recently in one of our departments where there was I think this was probably done in closed session. These are done in closed session, aren't they?
Yes.
So I can't identify what it was, but it involved somebody that made a significant transfer, and we inquired of that transfer because it involved a significant change in that person's duties. And again, it's wonderful to have the professionals recommending it, but again, it's basically the employee's in a position where the employee may not really want to do that, and it allows us the opportunity to question the employee and be sure that there's rationally a reason for it. I can't identify the situation, but it's refreshed my recollection. This was a very significant change, and we had many questions regarding this because it altered that individual's future significantly. And it was the right thing to do, but we had to go through it. Again, you have while it's the staff, it is the staff, and this person may feel, the person that's having these qualifications may feel somewhat coerced needlessly into doing it because he has to keep his job. We allow that another level. I'm not sure I'd agree. I think this needs to stay because of that. That was a good example, and if we, I understand that it cuts us down, and in a lot of instances we don't, but I know in that particular one we did. So I'm not going to be in favor of this.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I agree with Mr. Gantis in terms of that one case we had that may have been important
you
to hear
remember
that.
that too, yeah.
I do remember that. However, in that case, the employee did in fact sign the request for the transfer, and the employee has a chance to appeal it if he doesn't want to.
No, he doesn't. If he's requested it, it's not part of what he's
Well, if he's requested it, then...
Yeah, but there may be a coercion to request.
Mr. Chair, transfer requests are just that. They are requests. They are generated presumably by the employee, and the employee signs it, says, I request to be transferred from systems analyst to administrative analyst, and that's...
Why don't we let the city attorney come back, and then at that point we can go over it?
Actually, I don't have to come back. There's the relevant section in the charter. I agree with Mr. Doyle, quickly reviewing the relevant section of the charter. It is not included as a specific provision. It actually provides that the commission may adopt rules to address the issue of transfers, and there already is a rule that exists. If you wanted to modify the rule to eliminate the role of the commission, that would be permissible. However, I think both Mr. Gannis and, for whatever it's worth, I think Mr. Gannis and Mr. Doyle make a compelling argument for continuing to keep the rule in place, particularly where and if, in that rare case, an employee believes that there may be some coercion, that they felt that they were just backed into a corner and had no other choice but to sign a transfer, and when questioned by the commission, felt a little freer to be able to open up to the commission about the issue. So there is some safeguard involved in allowing an employee to have that additional level of review before the 5 independently appointed individuals to be able to oversee that type of issue. Again, for whatever that's worth.
Mr. Chair, if I may, for the record, state I was not taking a position one way or the other on this. I was simply trying to provide some clarification as to why perhaps it's there. Frankly, from my standpoint, it would be helpful to not have to bring these before the commission, and I think a lot of the departments would appreciate the ability to handle this administratively, but that is certainly up to the commission to make that determination.
Well, on this particular issue, I agree with Commissioner Gantis, and I think the rule should stay as is.
I agree too, believe it or not.
Anything else on this agenda item?
Can we, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, we are going to be brought back for final determination items on these rules, items 1 through 7, item 9 that's been changed, the email situation,
Right.
item and 10, item 12, again the same change as item 9, through item 16, items 20 through 28, with the understanding that item 27 is subject to the legal research of the city attorney.
And we should point out that rules 8, 11, 17, 18, and 19 will not be brought back.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
If that's the consensus of the commission, then we'll work with staff to bring those back at the earliest possible time.
All righty. Next item.
Item 7, agenda forecast.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the agenda forecast is before you. We have our upcoming meetings March 10th, March 24th, April 14th, April 28th. Nothing really on the agenda at this point. We are, again, going through our specifications, and we do anticipate having those brought before in the upcoming meetings, as well as possibly job bulletins and other business that might be pressing. We can also figure, I would say, at some point in the next month or so, coming back to you with completion of the rules that we're going to consider for adoption per the recommendation you gave tonight. I do also, and this is, I don't want to stray from the agenda item, but remind you all, I sent an email out about the construction that'll be going on in these chambers here. The Public Works Department, city manager, they're going through this project, and they're hoping to cancel as many meetings as necessary to not disrupt the construction that'll be going on. So we will be looking at our agendas closely for the next few months to determining if there are very slow agendas that we would make the recommendation in concurrence with the chair to cancel those meetings.
Certainly.
Does that mean if they're canceled, we don't get paid?
What it means, John. That is correct. Next item.
Item 8, reports information.
Any reports or information? Next item.
Item 9, Civil Service Commission, staff comments.
Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
First of all, it was a joke, folks. We don't get paid. Secondly, is this Debbie's last meeting with us, or are we anticipating her coming back again?
As much as we like to have Debbie here, it will probably be, although Sandra's return is anticipated, but we're not sure what
and the reason is
she'll be in.
because she's done a great job, and I wanted to commend her on it. She's been very thorough in the agendas and the reports, and I appreciate that very
John,
much.
you're the only one that's not getting paid.
I did. I told you.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to thank the Commission for their approach to these rule amendments. I know it was long and painstaking, but I do appreciate your input and feedback.
I thought it worked
was
out very,
productive.
very well, the way it just kind of evolved.
Yes.
And
Good job.
I think we actually accomplished a great deal in a short period of time.
Move to adjourn.
Next item.
Item 10, adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.